Questions? Start back there.
My name is Steve Andrews.
There's mics so that we can get you on the tape.
Turn it on. There's a switch.
Hello, my name is Stephen Andrews. I'm at the Congressional Executive Commission on China. My question, thank you very much for the presentation. My question is my sense is that the foreign invested companies in China are under a lot more pressure to follow the law. In particular, Social Security benefits. Sort of the general understanding is that if a foreigner buys a factory, they have to pay almost twice as much to cover the labor costs that they're required to pay by law. And so my question is, do you see more of a push to require Chinese companies to pay sort of all of the labor fees and taxes they're required to pay by law? Sort of related to that, you mentioned all of these protests, and they were all at sort of foreign invested companies, at least the ones you flagged today. And so do you see similar protests at Chinese state-owned enterprises or non-foreign foreign invested enterprises? Thanks.
Why don't we take a bunch of questions and then, because I saw a bunch of hands, and then come back. David?
Actually, I was going to ask the same question because the examples that Han Dongfang gave in this presentation of the creating spaces have been foreign companies, foreign investors in China. And I'm curious to know if you had any examples where there were state-owned factories in the recent history that you've been able to create similar space. And the second thing is on this issue of the party becoming a social democratic movement and everything, I think you can look at a bit of recent history in the transformation of countries. You look at South Africa and how they did it and the results of Nelson Mandela's approach to that versus the approach, well, you could look at Syria today, for example, where people are saying, you know, it's all or nothing. There's no life for anybody that's in opposition, that's in control today after a revolution. So in the broadest sense, I can see where you're going with this idea that there has to be some thought about lowering the risk for current leaders and party members to make some of the changes so that they believe that there would be a life after that type of thing. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So I'm going to say a couple of things so you can answer whatever strikes you. So I'm wondering if our analysis of, communist China is being blurred by the fact that, the Chinese Communist Party is only communist in name, whereas China is very obviously capitalist. And then I wanted to talk about that role of fear for, labor organizing. I think it was Sunday when it was reported that workers in a factory in West Bengal in India, spontaneously revolted and beat to death the CEO of a company, and that sort of threat. I mean, I think that gives workers, the advantage of a little extra fear, while at the same time, the chief minister of West Bengal after that said, violence has no place in a democracy, wherein, a violence is being enacted on these workers for not being paid. And I'm wondering, there's that sort of tension. Maybe we could speak to that. And then, my comments earlier about, the Chinese Communist Party being only communist in name, I think also Sharon Hum spoke to that when she spoke about the shift in ideological rhetoric versus, that not matching up with its implementation. So I'm wondering if, since the Communist Party is only communist in name, shifting to a social democratic government, how much difference would that make? So thank you.
Bung, you want to take the first shot?
Well, sorry.
Just one brief question.
Oh, okay.
If you are the folks who are organizing outside the AFCTU, finding each red acronym, are they finding their way to each other? Is there any formal communication among them or organization building among them?
Dongfeng?
Well, we don't really see it that way. That we don't constantly see, or we don't base on our strategy on analyzing their foreign companies or China companies, because the rights to collective bargaining is either. And the thing, the tricky thing is, wherever it's convenient for us, we just start with. And the foreign companies are a better starting point because one, the workers working there, they're mostly born after 80th, even 90th, and this new generation doesn't know what is fear. They don't have the 1989 legacy. They, of course, don't know anything about the Cultural Revolution, how bad the situation is. Again, that's the fear. If you never know this, and you don't see it as a fear. So that's why in foreign companies, there are more of these kind of activities that's as fact. But in the state-owned enterprises, it's the management, the way they deal with the workers are the same. And for example, the 2008, when the labor contract law starts, there was one term about dispatch labor to make the workers lose their official labor relation and to become dispatched through other small companies. And who were the biggest portion to dispatch their workers? It's the state-owned enterprises. So they are the same on the management from the management angle, but the workers don't care and who you are. As long as I am no longer able to swallow, and then I will fight, particularly in the market economy background. So the ideological things is losing, is disappearing, and the more and more realistic. People, you don't see workers fight for political reason, for political rights. So therefore, surviving for the workers are also surviving. So therefore, for the convenience, the reality is foreign companies, but there are also strikes in state-owned enterprises. We did engage several cases from state-owned enterprises. One was in an oil company in Yan'an, where Mao Zedong was hiding during the war against Japanese. So that's supposed to be Mao's place. But the workers in the state-owned oil factories, they stood up. 500-something women workers. The company decided to dispatch them, and they went on strike. And again, the same lawyer. It sounds like there's only one lawyer available in China. The same lawyer was called, and he flew to Yan'an and talked to these 500 workers, help them to figure out the election for representatives and don't go massive things. Have representatives and do these, make the list clear. And I think 1 month after, or 3 weeks after, the company would withdraw their decisions and no more dispatch labor. So that's happened in state-owned enterprises too, but we are in general at the very, very first stage, still promoting the idea. And second is the Communist Party. Whether it's still a Communist Party, it depends not on what, we can always criticize them as it is not anymore, but we always need to see what behind, why. That is more important. If Communist Party is still as a Communist Party, why? What if it is not anymore, why? So that's, I would say, more important. I would say, no, the Communist Party is no longer as what it was 60 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago. It's changing. And now is, if you look at their policy, social policy and economic policy, is much more conservative than Mrs. Thatcher in the 1980s. And How can that be a Communist Party? And the question is, what made that Communist Party becoming like this? And second is, are we what we want the party to become in the future? And I would say the weak working class, the weak trade union movement is the reason. You can say, oh, the party made it weak. Okay, yes, good. But the reason is the union is weak, and the workers are weak for many years. So the party able to go that line. But I do believe within the party, ideologically or for some other reason, political reason, and there are still as the main force, I would say, as in favor of that left-wing belief and ideology. That's why I kind of tend to bet on that. It's not a proof. There's no evidence. I'm betting on this side, which is a strong trade union able to bargain, and a democratic union who have the chance to ally, even I use the ally, that heavy word, with the left part of communist within the party, to make that party into social democratic party. So in that case, a strong union will make a communist party into more real. It's not only criticize them, they're no longer real. So that will be my approach. And I want to say provide one more evidence, which is Burma. Anyone expected Burmese military regime will suddenly like that? That's different reason. I heard it's a religious reason. He started worry if he died, he would go to hell. So he wanted something nicer before he died. I don't know whether it's a rumor or truth, but anything could trigger something. So let's leave a door open for everyone, and instead of demonize and nail them on a demon's wall, and they will never be able to have a chance to jump out. And lastly, I would say democracy. Democracy is being a process to today, and still will be a process toward the future. I would say heavily, after World War II, the Cold War starts. A lot of things is based on the Cold War. Lots of things. The other day, when I was chat, I raised a question. We were talking about the President Obama's China policy on Japan and the islands, the Philippines and Vietnam, this thing. And I would say, what if China in 20 years become democratic? And there will be still disputes in between the countries on these islands. And what, at that time, U.S. military's responsibility in protecting allies? Will you still treat China as enemy, opposite, or ally, or something else? That's Cold War left over. And I think after a quarter of a century, the Cold War finished, and things move on. And we should, even internationally, international policy, we should review what the current strategy was based on, what was the reality. And if the Communist Party becoming a democratic regime, will you still, when there's a dispute between China and Japan on those islands, you still declare, said, we are going to wipe them off if they go on those islands? That wouldn't be appropriate. But you are violating your treaty. What about that? So I'm just leaving it as a question, as a way to think about how can we jump out from Cold War. And I do believe the term of democracy does apply to the future of Communist Party. I do want to give a chance.
I think there was one other question, the question of whether any of these unions have reached out to one another. And I would also, let me just expand that question. once these particular collective bargaining agreements are reached, or the process has been gone through, or the workers have made some decision, do these unions continue to exist within the plants, or do they vanish? And so, structural questions about those unions.
Thank you for reminding me, and I'm sorry to forget that question. Our strategy is this. I remember when I visited Poland and Czechoslovakia at that time, in 1995, and the Solidarność brothers and sisters really, really insist you should have an underground trade union movement, and then you can destroy the Communist Party and you will have a freedom. And the Czech people, they're more realistic. They say, you see us? And after the whole thing changed, then we spent one month, redid the election from bottom to the top. We elect all the old folks out and then replaced by Democrats. And now we have a democratic union, and we have all the asset of the union and heritage. Huge. They have very nice office compared with Solidarność. It's really, really was hard to describe. And look at today, the Eastern European countries' trade union. Where are they? Are they strong after gaining freedom? Not really. And look at Russia. Not look at Russia, it's too depressing, but it's just the fact. If you don't look forward a few steps, being strategic, you will have to swallow what you miss. That's not nice. We have to learn from them. So our strategy is this. Instead of to create independent union, which I categorize as Cold War strategy, Cold War mentality, a good union versus bad union. We will not go for independent union, but union independent. What's the differences? We don't create another one. Instead, we make the current one to be independent. And the second question is, independent from whom? I would say the first priority is independent from employer control. The entire bottom layer of this union, if it is a union, entire bottom and factory level is either appointed by the management or these union leaders or chairs or managers themselves. There's non-union people, non-workers are the union leaders in the factory. How can you wish to reform this huge union, ACFTU, by change some top people's mind and then they're democratic? If I go there, become the chair of ACFTU in Beijing, I can't change anything. At least there's something changed at the bottom. So therefore, the most urgent thing is to make the union independent from the management control. That's why our strategy is to make collective bargaining as a bridge in between ACFTU and the workers. What is lacking from ACFTU is workers' legitimacy. What is lacking from the workers is organizational resource. That's the reality, make the collective bargaining not possible. Why not build this bridge? Bring the workers into ACFTU through collective bargaining and bring the organizational resource to the workers through collective bargaining. And the ACFTU will get what they're lacking of, and the workers will get what they're lacking of. And we're rebuilding that union into a real union without a political drama. So that's our strategy. Therefore, we're not talking about outside of ACFTU to have a bigger network to confront them one day, beat them, all these things. It's within and slow and peaceful change. So that's why I would say this strategy not harm much people. Definitely it will benefit workers, it would benefit the party, but a small group of people, not that small, but small group of people will receive hit. Who are they? It's the 900,000 full-time staff within the ACFTU. And these people, most of them, they will lose their job. And therefore, ACFTU people don't like this idea is not for the loyalty of the party. It's loyalty to their job, which is understandable. We're union people, so protecting jobs is our duty, and they have their desire. But we have to understand this. This is their desire, but it's not political anymore. There's no more political motivation.
Okay. I'd like to thank Kang Dong Fung, and I'd like to thank Sharon Hum and Harold Meyerson for their thoughtful comments, and thank you all for coming.